Janeta Singh is here with us. Janeta Singh is an author, researcher, columnist, and literary art critic. She contributed her official insights for the film The Father of Modern Indian Art and has hosted a variety live show embodying light and shadow dance and curated the Raza Dialogues. She served as the art review editor for the João Rock Literary Journal and received the JRLJ Nonfiction Award in 2018. Her byline, Booked and How, featuring literary writings, appeared in the Navhind Times for 5 years. Janeta's articles have been published in Art India, Indian Literature, and other platforms. In conversation with Janeta, we have Rima Desai Gehi. Rima Desai Gehi is the editor of Art India magazine. She has previously written extensively on the cultural scene in the country for a variety of publications, including Mumbai Mirror, Hindustan Times, and India Today. Her first book, The Catalyst, Rudolf von Leyden and India's Artistic Awakening, was published last year by Speaking Tiger. Now, before we begin the session, Janeta Singh's book is actually going to be officially launched today here at Gulf, and doing the launch are our curators, Damodar Mauzo and Vivek Menezes. So, may I invite all four of you onto the stage, please?
What's the sheet for? Too. Wait. See ya. Thanks.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for being here this morning. Congratulations, Janeta. Let us start at the beginning. And what prompted you to dive into the life of F.N. Souza? Much has been written about him, researched about him, and written about him. Given how extensively his life has already been explored and researched, what prompted you to deep dive into his journey?
Can you hear me? Yeah. All right. So I would say that in 2011 to about 2013, I was undergoing a personal crisis. And my own personal unconscious was throwing up a lot of things. I was feeling very unbalanced and confused and chaotic. And in that state, you know, on like I was into readings of art and literature, also religious scriptures, to find balance, to find answers to my raging questions. And I looked at Souza's art in that context of a self-healing journey. I'd seen his art many times before, but I always regarded him as a group, the PAG artist. But now, in context of the self-healing journey, when I looked at his art, it's like I began perceiving new insights. Yeah? And very quickly, I came to believe that, you know, there is this social revolution coded in Souza's art. Especially his early art, when as a 16-year-old young artist, he came out with these emancipated figures and heads on his canvas. As also his female nude drew me in, which is a very controversial part of his body of work. And it was weird. I began seeing myself in that female nude.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I mean,
And so, yeah, I would also like to add, so I would say that Sousa was, kind of envisioning a new social possibility. Liberated men, liberated women, a strong man, a strong woman, an equal playing field. And we know that the feminine principle has been disregarded for centuries. It's somewhere there. So his imagery, in a way, lends a lot of agency and freedom to the feminine principle. And it's not just the feminine outside, the so-called female and male, the gender, but also the feminine wisdom, the feminine which exists inside the masculine psychology. So, shamans and prophets and visionaries have a very strong feminine core, which is to do with wisdom and intuition. So when Sousa's fortifying the feminine on his canvas, he's also calling forth the feminine within the masculine psychology, the whole feminine principle for that matter.
right.
Yeah.
I mean, looking back, which questions were the most significant for you when you started your inquiry? In your preface, you ask, why does Sousa's art appear so uneasy to the
Yeah.
eye? What is it that triggers and provokes us when we look at his creation?
So I would say that that was a very experiential thing, Rima. So what happened is that there's no public gallery who displays him in Goa. And I've been based here since 2010, and I know that he's a great artist, right? An international artist. And then I was invited to certain art collectors' homes, and they said, oh, we've got Sousa's works, and you come and see them. So when I went to their homes, they'd take out a suitcase from the loft and bring it down, and then unwrap a Sousa and show it to me. So that really troubled me. It fired my brain cells, and I thought, what is it in Sousa's art that they buy him for his asset value, right? And there are secondary markets supporting him in Europe and US, but they can't hang him in their living rooms. So then what showed up, this uneasy space became my driving force. And I came to understand, because by that time I had been embedded in Carl Jung psychology for over a decade. And I understood that there is this very dark, colossal shadow that lurks behind his works. So when people look at his works, maybe it's a distorted head or a female nude, right? So what they encounter is the shadow in their own psyche, and they get triggered and horrified. So I would say that Sousa's work is an exercise in shadow work of the collective human consciousness. Things that we've repressed and suppressed and rejected, he glorifies that, right? And in a way, the outer contours then become distorted. So it's the interiority of our psyche that he is teasing apart and telling us there's a lot of healing work to do as a collective, even as a human being, each one of us, and then as a collective human consciousness. This is a journey of healing, and that's how his work then becomes very visceral and cathartic.
Right. Sousa as an artist, as we were speaking yesterday, was widely celebrated, but at the same time, he was also widely demonized. You make a compelling case to humanize him. What made you explore this aspect?
I would say that as a society, as an Indian society, and they are our artists, and what have we done with our artists? M.F. Hussain. And now, very recently, there have been these 2 court cases, some kind of to do with the customs and so on, right? And the works were stopped and they were not allowed.
They were deemed obscene.
Yeah, obscene. And so you see Picasso and Bacon. When I studied Sousa's work for so many years, this is a 12-year research project. My book is an outcome of a 12-year research project, which I began in 2012. And what I realized was that, you know, we are so concerned or we are so staunch about certain belief systems that we just don't look beyond that. And each human being is so complex. And it is undeniable that every human being has a light side and a dark side. In fact, a human being, nature has so made us that any living thing, any human being, cannot be whole without the light and the dark. We become whole when we embrace our darkness. Because beyond the darkness is the golden shadow. And it will lead us to many answers. It leads us to a whole balance of our psychological and spiritual underpinnings. So, and I would also say that in Sousa's case, it's more to do with morality, the issues of morality, right? Of why we did not embrace him and then he went abroad. So here I'd like to quote from a passage by Jedu Krishnamurti. And it's from The Rite of Spring. And Jedu Krishnamurti writes that in all the world communities, everyone wants us to be respectable. But nobody talks about freedom. And once you go on that road of respectability, you've lost your freedom. Because freedom has a huge energy and you can arrive at it only when there is no fear. So a conventional disciplined mind is not free. A mind which has suppressed desire is not free. Because it's only through the understanding of the whole process of desire that you become free. And Sousa's art, in a way, does that for us.
Right, that Krishnamurti's quote serves as a great segue into the question that I was about to ask you.
Yeah.
On when you talk about this question of morality. A substantial portion of your book is dedicated to Sousa's depiction of women and sex. Sousa has had a long reputation for his treatment of women in his work. There's a certain crudeness, a certain gaze. You attribute Sousa with a feminist perspective, though many critics would disagree. In your own words, and I may quote, that many of Sousa's untitled works, pen and ink works, especially from the 70s to the 90s, depict archetypes ranging from youthful and desirable to grotesque and hideous forms. Could you elaborate on this perspective that you bring to Sousa's narrative and how we understand his work?
So I would say that multivalent archetypes, that he's got the entire gamut of the feminine on his canvas, okay, through the years. And we know that never gave up figurative art.
Correct.
So he had explored it very expansively. And I would say that, you know, we've got the Kama Sutra, we've got the Ananda Ranga by Kalyanamala, yeah? And this is high classical literature, but of course it was maligned and they were called books of sex. And Wendy Doniger's gone on this journey where she is, you know, done a critical study of the Kama Sutra, and she writes that Vatsayana, right in the beginning, writes that this is to do with the grooming and education of a young girl, of how she can know every part of her anatomy and physiology and readies herself for an adult life. Knows herself, she's so rooted in her own organic cosmic design, is where then she can make a very educated choice of what, you know, she wants to do, with whom she wants to pair up, right, and lead a very healthy sexual life. So in the West, there is this book which is called The Making of America, which came in the 1970, whereas Sousa is doing all this in the 1940s. He began in the 1940s when he was a 16-year-old young artist. Now, in 1970, this book comes out in America, which is called Our Bodies, Ourselves. And the New York Times reviews it, right? And the title is Thinking of the Unthinkable. And this book was brought out by the Boston Health Collective. It's a group of women who came together, and it gave in graphic detail the anatomy and physiology of a woman's body, right? And the thrust was that only when we know ourselves, when we understand what we are about, what is this cosmic design about, is that we can know how to conduct ourselves, and we'll be free. There's no outside agency telling you what to do, what not to do, what the patriarchal culture for centuries has been doing. Can't hear me properly?
Can you hear us? Yeah.
All right. So yeah, this is much better. Thank you. So this is one book which comes out in the 1970s. And the feminist movement took New York by a storm in the 1970s, where women artists, they became performance artists, and they were using their own bodies to make those vulgar, obscene, titillating, awe-inspiring, secretive, feminine concepts normal and mainstream. What Sousa had been doing in his pictorial language since the 1940s. So I give this argument very cogently, and I say that he was a precursor to the feminist movement. Also, here I'd bring in a caveat that Sousa is in connection with his unconscious. It's not just his conscious self which is carving those images. These images, the primordial images like the Lajja Gauri, which he did, is a part of his early art, which is a very controversial image in our cultures. The Sheila na gig, right? The Venus of Willendorf, which all kind of relegated and they were under wraps. And I would also confide in you that in my journey of a 12-year cycle with this book is that in the latter years, more so after the lockdown, more and more images and more sites came up where they began sharing or going into women's histories, all right? And so I'll also come to Barbara Walker, and her book came out in 1983, which is the Encyclopedia of Women's Secrets and Myths, yeah? And very recently, Carmen Winnett put up a show at MoMA in New York, and it was called a monumental show, and she came in for so much of acclaim and accolades. Now what she did was that it was called My Birth, and here she pinned up images of her own self giving birth, her mother giving birth, and also 2,000 women giving birth. All that imagery, right? And I thought, oh my God, Sousa's been doing this a century back. And in New York, she's being hailed. And even the article on Sheila na gigs came out only in 2022. So now there's this whole going back to the fertility cult, right? And also exploring multivalent feminine archetypes. Okay, whether she's a career woman, a single woman, what we call the Dakkanis and all, who were, and all that witch hunt which went on and so on, right? So there's this whole exploration which is on now. And then you all watch Netflix. So there's this teleseries called Masters of Sex, in which William Masters, a sexologist, along with Virginia Johnson, did a 2-decade research project, a very scientific research project on the physiology of sexual activity. And there's also another, because I've quoted from popular culture, Explained on Netflix, which goes into female orgasm, goes into female sexuality, right? All these matters which were thought to be obscene, were thought to be shameful, which we never embraced. And so we see the crisis that we are in. Okay, the whole gender inequalities, the kind of atrocities, the misogyny that goes on and is never ending. It's like the men and women have to take on this agency and own up to how we are organically. And I'd also like to quote here about Japanese Shunga art series from the 17th to the 19th century. The Japanese artists, very well-renowned Japanese artists, they were involved in the making of the Shunga series. And what is the Shunga series? It is to do with our bodies, to do with coupling, the Methuna couples, and so on. And these were manuals which were given to people when they became adults, young men and women, so that they could make their choices and also choose to live healthy lives, right? And they were given to newly married couples. So this was mainstream. It was everyday thing. They were just lying around. The more we keep it under wraps, the more we keep it, like, oh, this is so awful. And
Was Sousa seeing his work as a present day interpretation of these manuals?
So I have done a comparative study of his imagery with the Shunga series in the book. All right, I'd invite readers to look at that and to come to your own conclusion and judgments. Yeah, I've also drawn parallels with European masters. Like there's one painting called the Vedas, where I have drawn that there is an influence of the Krishna Leela, the Vastraharan scene, which would appear on matchboxes, calendar art, which we've all grown up with, right? So in Vedas, Sousa's women, they are not self-conscious or shy or shrinking or self-effacing. They're just grooming themselves by a riverbank, and they're so rooted and grounded in the landscape surrounding them. Yeah, the children with them. So their bodies merge with nature. And they're just being themselves. Whereas if you recall the very famous painting, The Large Vedas, okay, we have one by Cezanne and by Matisse, The Joy of Life, all right, which is also along a river and so on. But there the figures are all twisting, cavorting. They're not themselves. They're not themselves. They are not confident. They are not embodied. These are topical issues now. Embodiment has entered fields of creativity, of trauma, health, and healing. So unless we don't become embodied in our own bodies, there's always a disruption in our psyche, which then leads to diseases and ill effects, right? So I've compared these paintings and it said how their culture was, so embedded in a different socio-cultural mapping, and how Sousa paints the Vedas. And what a difference just looking at those paintings.
Right. Moving on, Sousa also had a long-standing troubled relationship with Catholicism. In explaining Susanna and the Elders, you address this aspect. I'd urge you to share more about your research into this complex and fraught subject.
So what Rima is referring to is an essay in my book, which is to do with Susanna and the Elders, which is a biblical story from the book of Daniel. And Susanna was accosted by two elders, clergymen, right? And the story is that she's bathing in the garden, and then these two people come and they want to, they demand sex, and when she refuses, it results in a case of promiscuity. So then in the tale, it is that Sousa, like how Draupadi calls upon Krishna. So Susanna, to her aid comes Daniel, and he says, she follows the Torah, and she's a very, pious woman, and then we can't do it to her, and so she's free. right? So it's like a patriarchal figure comes to save her. So so then I've drawn inferences from the Vayu Purana, the Mahabharata, and Gandhi's philosophy to explain this painting. So Susanna stands in the center, and there are these two clergymen on the side. All right, I invite people to have a look later. And what he's done to Susanna is that he's made her a feisty heroine. Now, Susanna and the Elders this theme was very, very popular, and it has been adapted and painted by many, many artists in the past, like Tintoretto and then Alessandro Allori. Yeah. So, but they made Susanna look like a temptress, as if, oh, the elders were so hapless, like she tempted them. So they painted Susanna in such a way, right? And there's a shift in Artemisia's depiction where she, as an artist, depicts Susanna distressful and also loathful of the advances of the clergymen. Okay, because we know her story that she was actually raped by her mentor, who was a landscape painter. So in a way, she's woven that into that painting. But what does Sousa does? What does he do? So I'd like to read. Would that be fine?
Sure.
Sousa exposes, highlighting. Oh, what? In the back. Okay. Highlighting the clerical vestments mingled with spiky strokes, Sousa exposes corruption and misuse of social power by the elders and underlines looking as a male gendered activity. By styling Susanna contrary to the male gaze fantasy, and by taking away from her the woman's erotic exhibitionist role, Sousa codes her with pure strength. Powerful resistance in the face of powerlessness, unhindered by shame, guilt, or eroticism. Sousa plainly demonstrates a corrective on the interpretation of Susanna in the story. Not only is she a teacher of the Torah, but also above reproach, deflecting the unrighteous conduct solely onto the elders. Sousa's visual sanction and praise of Susanna builds a strong narrative against sexist prejudice that women are responsible for adultery in society. By owning up to her sexuality and every part of her anatomy in that painting, it all belongs to her. Susanna uses her defiled body as a lethal weapon, clearly making known that she is in no way to blame for the men's perverted thoughts or sexual advances towards her. It is entirely their responsibility. Sousa's portrayal of Susanna has its grounding in readings of the Vayu Purana, the Mahabharata, like I mentioned, and the non-violent movement of Mahatma Gandhi. In Indian mythology, goddess Sati and Draupadi are women who are denied agency by patriarchal voices in sacred Hindu religious texts. Goddess Sati self-immolates herself in rage, and Draupadi prays for divine intervention and is saved by Lord Krishna, much like Susanna in the biblical story. Sousa said about Gandhi, Gandhi gave us a sense of real freedom. Gandhi's concept of freedom through the non-violent movement is well explained by, I've quoted here a book, The Impossible Indian by Faisal Devji. Gandhi's psychoanalytical theory of transmuting or redirecting violence through the use of non-violence was liberation from violence itself. As a philosophical anarchist, Gandhi posited resistance as opposed to victimization. If non-violent struggle was impossible, then the evil of violence was better than victimization, which Gandhi identified with cowardice. Freedom and sovereignty was every citizen's natural possession as long as one was fearless to withdraw one's cooperation from an unjust order. Susanna in Susa's painting is what goddess Sati and Draupadi could not be. Susa impregnates Susanna's spirit with strength and fearlessness, right? I think there's a little repetition here, so I'm just skipping and moving ahead. Um, so after this, then I have actually quoted lines from Mahashweta Devi's eponymous story, Draupadi. Would you like me to read that? Sure. Yeah.
Sure.
So before that, I'll just like to add a few lines here about what Susanna looks like in that painting. An unerring dark line defines her strong features, a pair of unflinching, stony, hard eyes pushed up in her forehead, the Greek aristocratic prominent nose, firm lips set in a line, and a hard clenched jaw, framed by spiky hair curling to a sharp point off her right shoulder. She's undoubtedly a woman to be reckoned with. So now Mahashweta Devi in her story Draupadi stands before Sena Nayak. So this is the, kind of the last part of the story where there's this culmination on a high note. Draupadi stands before Sena Nayak naked, thick pubic hair matted with dry blood, two breasts, true wounds. Where are her clothes? Won't put them on, sir. Tearing them. Draupadi's black body comes even closer. Draupadi shakes with an indomitable laughter, and Sena Nayak simply cannot understand. Her ravaged lips bleed as she begins laughing. Draupadi wipes the blood on her palm and says in a voice that is as terrifying, sky splitting and sharp as her ululation, "What's the use of clothes? You can strip me, but how can you clothe me again? Are you a man?" She looks around and chooses the front of Sena Nayak's white bush shirt to spit a bloody gob at and says, "There isn't a man here that I should be ashamed of. I will not let you put my cloth on me. What more can you do? Come on, counter me. Come on, counter me." Draupadi pushes Sena Nayak with her mangled breasts, and for the first time, Sena Nayak is afraid to stand before an unarmed target, terribly afraid.
Right.
So, Reema, I just like to say one more thing here is that the male gaze, which I trace back to Greek classical times, is when the first goddess was sculpted nude, Aphrodite of Knidos, and how Praxiteles embellished her very subversively with, qualities of sin, shame, and modesty, which continued for centuries. We've got Birth of Venus, Venus of Urbino, Goya, Velasquez, Titian, continued. And then this nude arrives at the turn of the modern era. And what do Indian artists do with that? Dhurendra in the JJ School of Art, or what he does, because in our culture, goddesses are worshipped in every home. Yeah, they have a certain agency. We've got Kali, we've got Durga, we've got also the sweet goddesses like Lakshmi, right? And in Goa, in the forest groves of Goa, you go up with stone sculptures of Gajalakshmi flanked by elephants and Durga, right? Which Susa would have seen as a growing boy. Yeah.
That brings me to my question that you discussed Susa's early growing up years in Goa before he moved to Bombay. And now as we talk about your book, sitting in this beautiful landscape in Goa, what influence did this, state and his formative years in Goa have on his art?
So like I was talking about those forest groves where we have these laterite stone. And I would say that the mother goddess cult in Goa goes back 2000 years because we've excavated the Kurdi goddess along the river bank. Yeah. And this is again a laterite stone sculpture of the Kurdi goddess. And then besides these, in my book, there's also, which is contributed by Nirmal Kulkarni, and Pantalao Fernandez. They have contributed images of the goddesses in temples and forest groves of Goa. Yeah. And I would also say that a confluence of cultures. When Sousa was growing up in Goa and Bombay, he was born as a Catholic. So in the church is the impaled image of Christ on a cross, which is the ascents, but then there's this whole festivity and splendor and the gluttonous celebration of wealth, right, which he went against. And also, Virgin Mary, who's compromised by her maternal instinct and virginity. But then he goes to these Jatra festivals, he goes to the temple and the Jatra, and there he sees Devdasis, which are called the Kalavans in Goa, dancing. They're so beautifully dressed up and they're so accomplished in the arts, singing, dancing. They would write poetry and, the classical literature that we have today from these women. They were so accomplished. And they would sing and dance to the legends of Draupadi and, to the legends of Durga and Kali. Yeah. And also the warrior women in Karnataka, Abaka, Chauta, Kittur Chinnamma, Kaladi Chinnamma. So these were, women who held the Portuguese and the British at bay and did not allow them to invade their kingdoms for decades together. They were such strong women. And their stories had entered the Yakshagana plays. And Yakshagana is a traveling theater. Okay, they perform in different street corners and sometimes in halls, but they're traveling all along the coast, right? And he would have watched these Yakshagana plays and listened to these stories being enacted, right? So in his early art, as a 16-year-old artist, when you look at the things that he came out with, his canvases, they are so fascinating. And I believe and suggest in my book that they were influenced by these stories of women. No artist has begun with women heads looking pensive, contemplative, very intelligent. Sousa, as a young artist, begins with women heads, looking so brave and beautiful and intelligent.
To that come, I would urge you to speak about his early years when he watched his widowed mother.
Yeah. So there's one, my middle portion is to do with growing up years of Sousa in Goa and Bombay. And the first line, I've taken on Sousa's voice, and it begins with, the earliest memory of my mother was a woman in black. Because she negotiated Goan Catholic society as a widow, canned and caged. But within herself, she was like a bird and she wanted to fly and laugh and just be herself, let her hair down. So he did a very psychological sketch when he was just 14, 15 years old and he was studying. So in this sketch, I don't know whether it's his mother, but it's a woman who stands tall. She's got a wide frame as if she is, bearing the mantle of conventionality, right? She's regal and disciplined and she follows the patterns and what is expected of her. Yeah. But within that, he carves a young girl who's raised her hands up and she's singing. So when he spent those private moments with his mother, he could see that she had this potential energy that she could not express in day-to-day society, that she wanted to sing and dance and let her hair down and be herself, make her choices, do what she wanted to do, have control over her life and her body and her choices. So he was privy to that. And see what a psychological sketch that he did when he was just 14, 15 years old. And I think it was this. There's another great sketch, 4 girls running on the beach. It's a beautiful sketch. Again, it's followed, it follows this sketch. And so these are just 4 women running on the beach. They're wearing bikinis, a 2-piece thing. And they're just so themselves. They're just having fun. This is how we want to be, free, without a male gaze, without anyone making statements or judgments. This is how we are, and we are having fun. So embodied, so one with themselves or what they are as organic wholes, not really disregarding any part of themselves. So you remember that sketch of a mother with the baby? Yeah. So that this baby and this mother is there. So in that, when you just look at that sketch, you will see that she's nurturing, she's nourishing, she has that qualities in her, she's very feminine, but she hasn't compromised her persona, her individuality just for that child. She's also a sensual woman, she's sexual. So she's holding on to all parts of herself.
Right. Sousa has been given various labels, right? From that of being deeply complex to a misogynist, even. But throughout your book, you make a case for him being a misunderstood artist, one who was celebrated in his time, but still remains an enigma, sort of. What led you to interpret Sousa through the lens of Carl Jung's philosophy? And what new perspective this it offered in the plethora of research and writing that's already been done on Sousa?
So, according to Carl Jung psychology, it's like every human being has two personalities. So, there's personality 1 and personality 2. So, personality 1 is more guided by your ego. And it's what you do in your external life, the career you choose, the person you get married to, the children, whatever, all your choices, the way you keep your home, where you dress up, all that, right? Whereas personality number 2 is to do with your inner life, to do with the self, the soul. And it's here that the conscious, unconscious comes together. So when Sousa is tapping into the unconscious, mining images, it's this conscious, unconscious process which is going on, right? So all this becomes clear through Carl Jung psychology. Also, Carl Jung's libido, the term libido, means psychic energy, which then blends with Henry Bergson's Elan Vital.
Right there, I'll cut you and I'll quote Sousa from your book. My painting is in fact not a product of love or anger. My painting is a product of my libido, the energy one, whether I am sleeping, fornicating, writing, or painting. It comes from nature.
Comes from nature, right? So all these great philosophers like Henry Bergson, then there is Carl Jung, then there's Deleuze. Deleuze, when he wrote Bergsonism, so he said that Elan Vital, what Bergson was talking about, is it's the inner energy, and it's not just it's like the inorganic and organic matter becomes one. So we are all imbued with it, right? And so it kind of aligns with quantum mechanics. Then it's all about vibration and energy. And also Arthur Schopenhauer comes here, the will to live, and also Spinoza, right, with endeavor and effort and how that drives us. It's something that we want to exist and enhance ourselves. So it is this energy that I see and I believe in Sousa's canvases, or the way he went on about his art uncompromisingly, that he gave up everything. He had a very troubled personal life, but he did not compromise on his freedom, because for freedom you need a whole lot of energy, which is without fear, like I said before, as also the intellect is born, it has a different capacity, and it cannot be born in disciplined lives, right?
True. And coming back to your very first answer, just to sort of tie this conversation, in this psychoanalysis and research of 12 years that resulted in this wonderful book, what was your personal healing journey? What has been your personal journey been like, the healing journey, and how has it made, how have you transformed as a human?
So like I said, I began this project when I was going through a personal crisis. And there were all these shadows in my psyche, which I had not addressed. And partly, I would say, not partly, more so they came from the society that I lived in, right? And it's that everything that we've rejected and suppressed And that is what causes all the unbalance. Yes. So I would say that my journey with this research project, 12 years, is where I have more and more unearthed the shadow, personal unconscious as well as the collective human unconscious, right? And how we can move towards healing and have renewed patterns of thought. Like Souza is a post World War artist. After 2 world wars is when he becomes active. So he is questioning in his Head series, which is as prolific as his female nude. He's questioning, why do we go to war? Why we do the things we do? Why are we the way we are? Right? And a man of knowledge is one who does not only love his enemies, but who hates his friends.
Yes.
So what does it mean by hates his friend? Means if I am so okay with my shadow, and everyone has a shadow, if I'm okay with my darkness and I am somewhere embraced it and know how to mitigate it so that it doesn't play out in society, in and around me, right? It could be jealousy, it could be anger, it could be manipulation, it could be ambition, whatever is my shadow, right? If I have understood myself and my psyche and I know how to regulate my shadow along with my light so that I become a whole human being, right? So I've lost track of what I was going to say. So it's like the journey has been more about the shadow, unearthing of the shadow, okay, here and outside that I can see. And the more you are engaged with yours, you can see it outside.
Right. This has been a wonderful discussion. I would like to open this up I think we have room for 2 questions. If anyone in the audience has a question for the author, yeah, I'd pass on the mic to you.
So I would say I've become stronger and whole through my journey.
Wonderful, wonderful, and more power to you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. So the question. The thread that I lost. So I
Was saying that how one hates the friends.
yeah, but how one hates the friends. All right. So I think you're a very attentive listener. Thank you so much for being in the audience. So how we hate our friends. So a person of knowledge will hate his friends in the sense that he is a Hiyoka. Now, in the Native American tribe, all right, there's this Sioux tribe, and there a person is like a shaman, but they call him a Hiyoka, and his role is that he's sitting with his friend, but since he's so resonating and knows about his own shadow, he can see the shadow in his friend. Maybe jealousy played out, or some kind of aggressiveness played out, or something, which the friend did under the table. So he knows this is the energy in the room. Like we are sitting together and, I bought this house. So, how congratulations. That's so wonderful. But you can make out, they are so envious. So the energy playing out is envy, right? So call it out. So hate your friend in the sense, call it out. In a cozy twosome, he's your friend, but his growth lies in him embracing his shadow and becoming whole.
Right.
So call out your friend if you're really his friend. That is the work of an artist and a lover. They take you to where you consciously cannot go. So I hope I've answered your question. Thank you.
Well, I think that it's time.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being with us this morning. Over to you, sir.
Nothing. On behalf of Goa Writers, I thank Janeta and Rima for this very interesting and illuminating session on FN Souza.